What if I were to tell you that the Chinese government has quietly been able to take land from struggling countries for the past few years, not through the use of force, but by creating debt traps for these countries through predatory lending practices? The way that China is able to do this is through a project called the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is a global infrastructure development strategy run by China that was first announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013. It claims to promote economic development and connectivity between Asia, Europe, and Africa through the investment and development of infrastructure projects such as ports, highways, railways, and power plants. The Belt and Road Initiative is based on two main components: the Silk Road Economic Belt, which focuses on connecting China to Europe through Central and Western Asia, and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, which focuses on connecting China to Southeast Asia, Africa, and Europe through the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. China argues that these Belt and Road projects will promote cooperation and coordination among participating countries and help to address global economic challenges such as poverty and inequality. But China's true motivations behind the Belt and Road Initiative aren't to help other countries. China is looking out for itself and engaging in economic imperialism by creating debt traps for other countries that take the bait. Countries that enter into the Belt and Road Initiative often do so by signing a Memorandum of Understanding. This is a formal agreement between China and the participating country that often outlines the scope of the agreed upon projects, the loans involved, the roles and responsibilities of each party, and the expected outcomes. The exact terms of these agreements are highly secretive, as the Chinese government does not disclose the exact terms of the loans or any other conditions that come with them in the agreement. What's generally known about them, though, is that these agreements are typically entered into through China approaching poorer countries and offering loans to the country so that they can build infrastructure projects. The financing is arranged by Chinese banks, and it's typically a requirement that Chinese contractors are awarded the contract for the construction and also manage the projects after they are completed. As of March 2022, between 140 to 147 countries are estimated to have signed memorandums of understanding or cooperation agreements with China to be affiliated with the Belt and Road Initiative. These include most countries in Africa and Asia, as well as a growing number in South America as well. All told, China has lent $1 trillion over the last decade as part of Belt and Road projects, which has made China the largest government lender to the developing world. The money it has lent to other countries as part of these projects make up almost as much as every other government combined during this period, according to the World Bank. So why is China lending money to these countries left and right? The answer is that the benefits for China from these agreements are immense. For one, economic growth is a major motivator behind these projects. While China's economy has grown rapidly the past several decades, its economy and domestic market is starting to slow down, with the fourth quarter of 2022 showing the slowest growth to the country's GDP in half a century. With China's economy slowing, the country is looking for new sources of growth. The Belt and Road Initiative is one of the answers that Xi Jinping and the CCP have identified as an opportunity for China to create infrastructure and development projects in other countries, which in turn can create demand for Chinese goods and services. In practice, these Belt and Road project agreements contain requirements that give Chinese companies the contract for managing and executing the construction projects in the country borrowing the loan from China. So the Chinese government gives the loan to the borrowing country so that the country can use it to pay for the project's construction. But the country then pays that money from the loan right back to Chinese contractors, since they are the ones being used for the project's construction as required by the agreements. In this way, most of the money from the Chinese government loan flows right back into China's economy. China also benefits by being able to use excess domestic production in certain resources like steel and cement for these Belt and Road projects. The Belt and Road Initiative provides an opportunity to export this surplus capacity to other countries. For example, China is far and away the largest steel producer in the world according to the World Steel Association. China is also the top producer of cement and accounted for over 7 times as much cement as the next highest producer in 2021. Belt and road construction projects in foreign countries give China's economy a way to export this production to other countries as part of construction. Another key benefit of the Belt and Road Initiative to China is that it focuses on increased connectivity through building logistics projects like ports, highways, and railways. This increases China's trade potential with neighboring countries through improved infrastructure, which can help them to gain access to new markets for their goods and services. Greater connectivity also gives China easier access to trade for key natural resources in other countries. But perhaps the biggest benefit China gains from the Belt and Road Initiative is increased political influence over the countries that it partners with. Since China is lending money to other countries to help them fund expensive infrastructure projects within their countries, this provides them with significant leverage and influence over these partnered countries that owe them large sums of money. This gives China a way to exert influence over other countries in strategically important regions for them, such as Central Asia, to promote their own political and strategic interests. Once China has invested billions of dollars in a foreign country, and that country becomes indebted to them, it gives China immense political sway over what that country then does. This is why China is willing to invest in just about any project that a developing country wants. Because even if the project fails or the country defaults on its debt to China, China will still come out on top through its increased influence and ability to seize collateral from the loan default. This is why China is more concerned with entering into agreements than anything else. Once they have an agreement with a country, they benefit in some way or another in nearly all situations. It's a heads I win, tails I still win situation for them. In fact, it could be argued that China benefits the most from when a country defaults on its debt to China and is unable to repay the loan back. This is because if the country fails to pay its loan back to China, the project can then come under Chinese ownership and control. So despite the Chinese government's claims that the Belt and Road Initiative is intended to create economic growth and opportunity for other countries, the projects that the CCP has prioritized for the initiative have been made for largely strategic and political reasons primarily, not economic ones. China doesn't really need a project that they fund to be economically viable for the country that's requesting the project. If the project is unable to earn enough to support the loans incurred to build the project, it's even better for China because then they can take ownership outright. Look no further than the Hambantota port that Sri Lanka built using a loan from China. Despite the fact that feasibility studies showed that the port would never work, China was willing to pay for the port when no one else was willing to lend money to Sri Lanka for a port that they knew was doomed to fail. The port then opened in 2010 and was immediately unprofitable and unable to facilitate enough trade to pay back the loan to China. So China negotiated with Sri Lanka to foreclose on the port. This conveniently gave China the port and 15,000 acres of land in Sri Lanka for 99 years. All things that China would never have been able to obtain if Sri Lanka had not defaulted on the loan. This gave China control of territory near a strategic rival in India, and a key foothold near the Indian Ocean, which is economically and militarily significant. Now that China has control of the port, a military survey ship even docked there just last year, which caused alarm in the international community. And the thing is, this wasn't an accident either that Sri Lanka couldn't pay back the loan from China and that they had to give up the port. It was by design. Research showed that the port would never be commercially viable, but China was the only one willing to fund the doomed project anyway, knowing full well that it would fail. And the loans that China extended to Sri Lanka were particularly burdensome in terms of interest and the loan duration. Chinese loans carried an average interest rate of 3.3% compared to Japan's 0.7%. The maturity period for Indian and Japanese loans were also 24 years and 34 years respectively, compared to just 18 years for Chinese loans. And China ultimately owns 20% of Sri Lanka's public external debt, according to a recent study. So pushing Sri Lanka over the edge for strategic gain wasn't an accident, it was the goal all along. This isn't an isolated case either. Similar things occurred with the country of Tajikistan, where China owns approximately 60% of the country's international debt. In 2011, Tajikistan's parliament agreed to give China 1,000 square kilometers of land in exchange for China waiving a large part of their outstanding debt, running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. In addition, the country has also allowed China to develop and mine some of the country's gold and silver deposits in exchange for relief on the debts that it owes to China. Through these debt traps that China creates by providing large loans to struggling countries, China is then able to capitalize when the country inevitably fails to pay back the loan by taking payment in land, natural resources, and other things. It's estimated by the World Bank that approximately 60% of all Belt and Road Initiative loans are with countries that are in financial distress. While extending tons of loans to countries that won't be able to pay the loans back doesn't make sense in terms of getting your money back, the Chinese Communist Party was happy to make the loans knowing that they would get a return on their investment through political and strategic gains instead. Chinese banks were told by the government to extend loans for the projects despite the Chinese banks knowing that the projects were not financially and economically viable. These loans were labeled, quote, policy designated, unquote, by the banks, to make clear that the reason behind the loans was not financially motivated, but was a politically and strategically motivated decision by the Chinese government. With China having loaned out $1 trillion the past decade for Belt and Road Initiative projects to struggling countries, there could be a lot of potential defaults on these loans in the near future. It will be important to pay close attention to what China tries to take from these countries instead to get a return on their investment. But be sure to let me know your thoughts about the situation in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more finance-related content. Thanks.